The building trusted him with its dirt, not its dignity. Every night, long after the last executive had gone home, he pushed his cart through silent corridors, wiping fingerprints from glass, doors and erasing footprints that reminded him where he didn't belong. To everyone else, he was just the janitor. To his children, he was everything. A single dad who worked 2 shifts, skipped meals, and carried guilt heavier than the mop in his hands because he was never home when they fell asleep. At work, he spoke little, not because he had nothing to say, but because experience had taught him that silence was safer. He had learned the rhythm of the company better than most managers. He knew which offices stayed lit late, and which doors closed when secrets were discussed. He noticed who treated people like tools and who at least pretended not to. The CEO fell into the second category. Never cruel, never kind. Always moving. Always important. That morning, the tension was thick. Even the air conditioning seemed louder. Executives whispered near the elevators, faces tight, voices low. A major deal had collapsed overnight. Billions were at risk. Jobs, reputations, futures, all hanging by a thread. The janitor wiped the marble floor near reception, listening without looking. He didn't want to know details. Knowing never helped people like him. He noticed the man by the elevator before anyone else did. Too still. Too focused. One hand buried inside his jacket, eyes fixed not on the screens but on the hallway. The janitor's instincts tightened. Years of protecting too small, children on crowded buses and broken streets had sharpened his awareness. Something was wrong. The CEO stepped out of a meeting, phone pressed to his ear, frustration written across his face. He was talking about damage control, about sacrifices that had to be made. The word layoffs floated briefly before being swallowed by the echoing hall. Time slowed. The stranger moved. The jacket opened. The metal caught the light. There was no hero's pause. No dramatic decision. Just motion. The janitor dropped his cart and ran. The sound of the gunshot shattered the quiet. People screamed. Someone hit the floor. Security surged forward. The CEO felt a violent shove and stumbled backward, his phone clattering across the marble. For a second, he thought he'd been hit. Then he saw the blood. It wasn't his. The janitor collapsed at his feet. Hand pressed to his chest, uniform darkening fast. His body shook, not from fear, but from the effort of staying conscious. The shooter was tackled. Chaos exploded. And yet everything felt unreal, like the world had cracked open for one terrible moment. The CEO knelt without understanding why. He had never been this close to the man before. Never noticed the lines of exhaustion on his face. The calloused hands, the cheap watch held together by tape. The janitor's eyes found his. Not with anger, not with regret, but with urgency. He tried to speak. Blood filled his mouth. He swallowed and forced the word out. Kids! That was all he said. Not his name. Not his pain, just them. Paramedics arrived. They lifted him onto a stretcher, pressing gauze against the wound. As they rushed him away, the CEO stood frozen, the weight of survival crashing down on him. He was alive because someone the company barely acknowledged had chosen to step in front of death. Later, as the building emptied and statements were prepared, a security officer picked up the janitor's phone from the floor. The screen lit up. Missed calls. School numbers. A message that read, "Dad, did you forget to pick us up?" Sent hours earlier. The CEO stared at it longer than he had stared at any contract in his life. He went back to his office. But the room felt different, smaller. The awards on the wall looked hollow. The numbers on his screen blurred. Somewhere in a hospital, a man fought for his life. A man who cleaned his office and listened to conversations, meant to decide the fate of others. As reports came in, a disturbing pattern emerged. The shooter wasn't random. He had connections, internal ones. Someone inside the company had been cutting corners, hiding losses, silencing anyone who noticed. The CEO had trusted the wrong people, and the right one had been bleeding on the floor while executives argued over exits and excuses. That night, the CEO didn't go home. He sat alone, replaying the moment again and again. The run, the shot. The word kids, he realized how easily the company had ignored the man who saved him. How policies designed to protect profits had quietly failed the people holding the place together. The janitor had taken a bullet meant for power, and nothing about that felt accidental anymore. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and quiet fear. Machines hummed steadily, marking time for a man who had never been given much of it. The janitor lay still, chest wrapped in white, skin pale but breathing. Doctors called it stable. The CEO called it mercy. He stood outside the glass longer than necessary, watching the rise and fall of a life he hadn't noticed before it saved his own. For the first time since becoming CEO, he canceled every meeting without explanation. No calls, no statements, just silence and thought. The children arrived that evening. Too small for the chairs, too serious for their age. They clutched each other's hands like they were afraid one wrong move might make everything disappear. The CEO didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. They knew who he was. They had seen his face on screens. Power was easy to recognize. They didn't ask for anything. No money, no promises. The older one finally spoke, voice shaking but controlled. Will he lose his job? That question landed harder than the bullet ever could. The CEO realized then how broken the system truly was. A man could give his blood, his body, his future to protect a company and still worry about employment while lying in a hospital bed. That night, something shifted from shock to resolve. He ordered a full internal audit, not the polished version executives liked, but the kind that dug into overtime logs, insurance claims, denied benefits, and silenced complaints. What surfaced was ugly. Unpaid hours buried under technicalities. Health coverage delayed just long enough to save money. Emergency leave requests rejected by automated systems with no human review. The janitor's name appeared again and again. Not as a problem, as a pattern. Then came the betrayal in full clarity. The executive behind the failed deal had known it was collapsing for months. He had falsified reports, shifted blame, and threatened anyone who questioned him, including contractors, including maintenance staff who overheard things they weren't supposed to. The shooter had been desperate, manipulated into thinking violence was his only option. The company hadn't just ignored warning signs. It had created them. By the time the janitor woke up, the world he worked in had already begun to change. He blinked against the light, confused by the quiet and the unfamiliar room. His children were there immediately, faces wet with relief. He tried to sit up, failed, and apologized out of habit. The CEO entered last. No suit jacket, no phone. He stood awkwardly, like someone who didn't know where power ended and humanity began. "I owe you my life," he said simply. The janitor shook his head. Anyone would have done it. But both men knew that wasn't true. The recovery was slow, painful. Bills piled up until they didn't because someone paid them quietly. The children stayed in school without disruption. Meals arrived anonymously. No press releases, no cameras, just action. When the janitor returned to work months later, he didn't push a cart. He walked into a room filled with people standing up, not clapping loudly. Not performative, just respectful, sustained acknowledgement. He didn't like it. He asked them to stop. The CEO spoke to the company that day, not about profits, not about growth. He told a story. No names, no dramatics, just the truth of a man who was considered invisible until he proved irreplaceable. Policies changed permanently. Living wages enforced, healthcare expanded, emergency protections guaranteed, anonymous reporting protected by law, not goodwill. Executives lost positions. Some faced charges. The company took a financial hit and never hit it. But something else happened, too. Productivity rose. Loyalty deepened. People stayed. New hires learned the story during orientation. Not as legend, but as warning and promise. That power without empathy is dangerous. That kindness isn't weakness. That heroes don't wear titles. The janitor eventually moved into a safer role. Fewer hours. Same respect. He still cleaned sometimes, by choice. He said it kept him grounded. Years later, when asked why the company culture felt different, the CEO answered honestly, because someone with nothing to gain gave everything. The janitor never called himself a hero. He just went home every night, cooked dinner, helped with homework, and slept knowing his children would never doubt their father mattered. And that was the change that lasted forever.